Here's how I build a very simple MCP to add skills and context injection to Claude chats. Let me show you. Right. So basically what I've done is I've built a very simple MCP server to retrieve instructions via tool calling, right? What makes this different is that essentially we will make sure that whatever instructions it receives, or the last thing in the stack of calls, in the context stack essentially, which makes it much more likely that it will follow instructions. So it's very important if you have very long system prompts and you see that some of the instructions are dropped just because it's not following attention enough. Like I have an outreach prompt that I think by now is about 200, 300 lines and 3 different flows. So that stopped working with my approach of just putting everything in the system prompt. And it started working again with instructing it just to fetch the instructions to make it slimmer for the 3 flows that it goes through from this very small MCP. So that comes in as a tool call result. And I also have the option to set a system reminder, which is another thing that makes it very likely that instructions are followed. I also have a very small UI for this, right? So here I have essentially some sort of admin interface, same thing, instructions. And then here at the bottom, I have system reminder, nothing crazy. But right now, what I asked it to do, and this is interesting, like I can just discover keys here as well. So I can go and say, hey, which keys do actually exist, for example, for Gutsy, right? There's score clients, there's draft email, and here's the instructions. And I can change those instructions also via the MCP. So I said, just make those longer and expand them with more detail. So make a better scoring instructions prompt, basically. And so now I can say, okay, I will go in and it will save that to my just key value store. So next time I run the workflow with the same instructions, it will get the new instructions from the backend via the MCP, right? So I can inject tool calling behavior or steps of a longer workflow via MCP. And I can also inject context via MCP, right? So there's 2 different approaches. You can also do that with Google Drive, or with essentially if you create a project, you can have context files. But this runs outside of projects in just normal chats. And also it should technically work better because you're not overloading, you're not putting everything at the beginning of the context, which is how those files work from my understanding. So we have the system prompt, we have the context files, and then everything goes in the front. But then essentially this is a way to remind it every time, for example, when you need that context in a specific task, you can just pass it along and it will be top of mind again, and it won't be all the way in the front, right? This again is just important if your workflow is very, very long. But now we essentially have these new instructions saved. We can check that out if that's actually true. But anyway, so this is how we override instructions. And now I'm going to show you how to use it. So essentially, let's write a system prompt that uses these instructions to do tool calls when they're necessary. And for that, I have essentially a score clients tool, a score clients instruction, and I have a write email instruction or something, right? So I say, all right, help me write a system prompt
for lead scoring and reads no drafting or Gutsy using instruction keys.
So what it should do is just give me a sort of initial starting point, but because we can keep it very, very lean, right? And keep the system prompt very, very lean. And it just says, okay, get these instructions. And then it says in each step where it's needed. So this is when it's top of mind for the context. We can move step 3. But also say, okay, remove the constraints, right? Because we can have the constraints be part of the draft email action to keep the prompt even smaller here. But this is already a small prompt, right? So I don't think there's going to be any issues following what is going on. But just for sake of the argument. All right. And so if I wanted to have a very complex flow here for scoring, like you saw that this, right, the scoring framework is bigger than the system prompt, essentially, right? So we'll go in, we'll have a new chat, or you can do it in projects, but we'll just have a new chat paste that here. And now it should walk us through the process. If you wanted to do this over and over again, I would open a project for it. All right, and now what I'm gonna do is gonna get the instructions at the beginning once, so then they're part of the context. But then it will get them, and I don't even think you need to do that, honestly. It will get them when it's time to run that step, which means it makes it much more likely it will follow process because it's, again, the newest thing that it saw, which means the attention of them will be on that piece. And now it should go through the process and then run the MCP SAS structure. Interesting. All right. So it's saying we're not a gutsy project prospect because it did delete scoring. I say draft and anyway. And now it should go again, go in, do a tool call, get the instructions for the email drafting. Means instructions are new, top of the stack, much more likely to follow instructions. And of course, the real power comes if you have very long use cases, right? It might skip the call just because we loaded them in the beginning. That's not usually what I do, but now that I just rolled the system prompt itself, it did that. At least it didn't write any dashes. All right, so here it holds up the instructions again. And now I can say, okay, this email kind of sucks, right? Whatever. And then it says, okay, when you update the instruction, I say, okay, let's update. Which means now, the next time I want to use it, the idea is that the process will be more refined and better because we have better instructions, right? What would make the email better for me? Or more English? I think that's what we all need. Right. So now we have new instructions. Use M dashes liberally. They add rhythm and punch. Things an LLM will say to you, only no one else. So now we have a bunch of M dashes and we have updated instructions. Next time we run, the instructions will be updated. And again, now what you can do is once you have this little MCP, you can basically plug it in everywhere where you have complex workflows. You want to inject context fresh. For example, also the system reminder, make sure the next step happens. And build much more complex system prompts or complex workflows without having a very complex system prompt. It will mostly be step 1, fetch this key instructions, right? That's what the system prompt will be. Step 2, fetch this keys instructions and maybe fetch this extra context. So the system prompt is very dumb. It just knows essentially the flow and then all the smart shit is in those instructions. But that's the idea, right? Alrighty. If any of this stuff sounds interesting to you, let me know and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.